Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Supatease video, and if you're new to the channel here, I'm reviewing all of the specializations moving into the new World of Warcraft expansion Shadowlands and ranking them based on their fun and their engagement and the longevity of the specialization. And what that means is, how long can I play the spec before I'm bored out of my mind and need to take a break or switch to something else? Because at the moment, with how the systems look in Shadowlands, I'm not confident that it's going to be very alt-friendly just yet, and you're going to be making a commitment to a spec and a commitment to a covenant that is likely going to be like pulling your hair out to try and turn around. Maybe that changes, maybe it doesn't. But I would rather err on the safe side, which is why I'm going into detail of all of the specializations and then creating tier lists to rank them on that metric. Now, of course, a lot of people are only going to care about tuning. They're only going to care about, does this do the most damage? Am I automatically invited to a group? Is this the spec that everyone is stacking? We're still in beta, and it's probably too early to guarantee that you'll get an accurate read on that. So to me, it would be a better idea to pick something based on, is it fun enough? Is it good enough that it gets me through the most moderate difficulty of the content in the game? Because, I mean, if you're being honest, unless you're going to go for mythic raid for world first kill or pushing your mythic plus keys to the absolute limit to the highest, or possibly competing in MDI or the AWC for the arena tournaments, I feel like you can get by with most of the melee specializations as they are in terms of their output and with a lot of the other changes. So Unholy Deathknight moving into Shadowlands is getting a lot of things returned to it from the Legion playstyle, and it's getting a lot of the old school utility brought back to it. One of the main things that it didn't get returned to it, which if you're a PvE player probably don't care if they came back, but as a PvP player, was the presences. So switching from Blood Presence, Frost Presence, or Unholy Presence. Just that element of stance dancing is a fun, engaging factor to a class for me, at least in PvP. And in PvE, you probably just always stayed in one presence. Maybe switch to Blood if your tank died and you needed to tank a mob or something. And outside of that, really, you'd never use it. But in PvP, actively trying to switch to a stance to get more damage out, or, oh, I need to help my healer, I need to switch to a stance to reduce damage. That was the gameplay that presences brought in their own unique Death Knight fashion. I would have liked to have seen them return. That's similar to aspects for hunters, but that's one thing that is not coming back that I personally would have liked to have seen. Other than that, your basic spell book is going to be, these are specs, all specs of Death Knight get these spells. The one baseline returning spell that you're going to like is Anti-Magic Zone, but it's incredibly nerfed from the Honor Talent version. Instead of being 60%, it's only 20% magic damage, but 20% is still very decent. In Mythic Plus, this will help enable healers that don't have strong damage reduction cooldowns, so things like Mistweaver Monk and Restoration Shaman. Perhaps we see synergies with Death Knights, so that they can provide damage reduction cooldowns that those healers don't normally have and usually struggle to get into groups. You're probably going, why Mistweaver struggling to get into a group? It literally played all the time in Mythic Plus and BFA, but it was overly compensated, buffed for the fact that it didn't have a damage reduction cooldown. And I don't know if it's going to stay at that level of tuning. And if it doesn't, and it's not getting damage reduction cooldowns, then it may need to look for synergies with specs that do. And obviously in a raid, you're going to be really desirable. This is an amazing raid cooldown, just 20% magic damage reduction for your entire raid. So definitely increasing the viability of the Death Knight. You don't have to spend an honor talent on it anymore. But if you want to enhance it, similarly to Darkness for Havoc Demon Hunters, the Dome of Darkness, I think it's called. They literally just call it Dome of Ancient Shadows. So you can go big anti-magic zone, and that's probably going to be a gameplay element that you're going to talk a lot about when you're playing in Arena. Is he big zone? Is he small zone? But you don't have to. So you just always get this little benefit. You could help your team out, or if you really wanted to make sure that you were going to survive with this cooldown in PvP, you now have that as an honor talent instead. Lichborn is coming back baseline, but this as well is not as strong as the honor talent Lichborn that's still in the game, and I'm not sure if it's going to end up getting removed. I feel like it probably will, or at least renamed. This version of Lichborn that you get at all times gives you a little bit of leech, so self-sustainability. It turns you undead, so you are susceptible to things like shackle and turn evil from paladin and priest, but you gain the benefit of being immune to charm, fear, and sleep, so you get a little bit of defense, not a lot. You could use this to immune yourself against a warlock when you're popping all of your pets out and maxing out your damage, which is going to be really important because one of the big drawbacks for Unholy Deathknight at the moment is that you've got so many cooldowns. You got to go one, you got to empower your pet. You got to get all your other pets out. You got to get your Gargoyle going. You got to go and empower yourself. Now you got to empower yourself again. You've got like 5 global cooldowns of just like, okay, now I'm pressing Scourge Strike. So adding this in to make yourself immune to some crowd control so you can get all of those things out of the way is going to help you out a lot. Other than that, Sacrificial Pact, which you don't have until you start to level up. It's kind of like Corpse Explosion, but it's like super good Corpse Explosion. So you blow up your pet. It does AoE damage, moderate amount, but it heals you for a huge amount. So more self-sustainability for the Death Knight. I don't know if they really needed it. I feel like Unholy Deathknight was already a really strong just Death Strike, but now you've got even some cooldown healing. You can think of this like renewal, right? And somehow Death Knight, I mean, now I'm kind of like calling out Death Knight players a little bit, but somehow Death Knights got around what Warlocks and Hunters didn't. So Warlocks and Hunters, for their pets to be brought into a fight, let's say their pets die, it's like a 6-second cast to res a Hunter pet or to get a Warlock pet. But DK pet is still instant cast, 30-second cooldown at all times. It seems really strange that they went through all this detail to make other pet classes really annoying to manage their pets, but Death Knights slipped through and their pet is exactly the same to manage. I guess we'll just go shh. We'll keep that between us. But yeah, you got a big heal. So that's nice, just as a little bit of a baseline. The mastery is changing slightly. I think this is because Gargoyle is coming back baseline, and they want to make sure that Gargoyle is good. But your minions will also do more damage. This is amazing just in general in the game, but really amazing in PvP if it scales with things like Raise Abomination. You pump out the Raise Abomination. They've baked in Azerite traits so that your Army of the Damned or your Apocalypse will also summon a Magus. I mean, you can get a ton of pets out all at the same time and just start popping off with those Festering Wounds. And in PvP, I don't see how this isn't a top performer in PvP with all of this self-sustainability, team utility, a lot of the legendary effects when we get into it as well. I mean, to me, Unholy Deathknight, on just theory and not tuning, there's no way it's not a top performer. And moving into a new expansion where the stats all get squished back down, it still feels very fluid. So unlike a lot of other specs that are maybe feeling a little bit chunky, that Unholy Deathknight is still crisp and smooth and crisp. Is that this conflict? There's probably conflict a little bit. But yeah, the mastery to buff all of your pets is really nice. Gargoyle being back baseline, calling that bad boy. I missed the Gargoyle. It was a talent that you couldn't really ever take, but now you got it back baseline. And when you level up, you'll be able to empower it. So every runic power that you spend, it does more and more damage. So there's going to be a lot of builds I expect around runic power generation and getting as many death coils out as possible to make this Gargoyle super powerful and supercharged. That seems like really fun to me. I like that kind of ramp, rewarded for maximizing your rotation, and I'm really glad to see it come back. You get a little bit of extra just passive benefits and damage to your already baseline abilities, and that's kind of what I meant by the Legion. Unholy Deathknight is returning, is more or less with that Mortal Coil, or with the Death Coil build, and ramping up for big burst windows. That pretty much concludes the baseline in terms of talents. Unholy Blight is like, it's also slightly altered so that your pets also do more damage. Maybe we see more play from this. Maybe that's their intention. But again, it's another thing you have to press on top of all the cooldowns. And this would be the one downside for Unholy Deathknight at the moment. And I would like to see the GCD change reverted in most cases, but I think that it is most problematic for Unholy Deathknights because of how many things. It's like you could just have one cooldown that increases the damage and does all these effects, but you've got 5 that are all their own individual GCD, but you have to use them at the same time. It would be different if you don't have to use them at the same time and you did them at different windows, but in most cases, especially in PvE, you do use them all at the same time. PvP, you could make the argument you could split them up, and then it's like you're baiting the other team. Like, hey, I used this. What cooldown are you going to give me for that? Oh, well, I was still waiting on these two, and then pop those. It is an advantage in PvP to have them be split up, but in PvE, when you're just trying to get to your maximum high point as quickly as possible, it is a downside. So you will likely notice that, but maybe that alleviates over time when as your haste goes up, or maybe they ease up a bit on the overall GCD cap, especially for Unholy Deathknight. Unholy Pact is just the Azerite trait coming back baseline. I don't know if you'll actually see any play here. Unholy Frenzy in PvP is very strong at the moment because it procs Gushing Wounds. It amplifies your haste, but if you were to run this now on top of getting Gargoyle baseline and along with Unholy Blight and maybe some of the new Covenant abilities, I mean, you're adding more and more of that just stacking up. Army of the Damned is also the Magus passive BFA Azerite trait coming back in, and to me seems like a safe go-to at the moment, as it's baked into one of the buttons you're pressing already rather than adding another one onto the list. We're not getting any new honor talents other than, as I already spoke about, the Dome of Ancient Shadows, making your baseline anti-magic zone a bit stronger. So that pretty much concludes the most important parts of the talents, the most important parts of the baseline abilities, and the spec-specific abilities. So as we move forward, we've got to get through the Legendaries, what they've got available so far, and what we can take a look at. These are general Death Knight legendaries. These are ones that you can use as any specialization. So if you're someone who likes to flex a little bit of blood for tanking or frost, you'll be able to use these and switch a little bit easier, as they're not just specific, but they come at the cost of probably not being as well performance wise. Death's Embrace increases the duration of your anti-magic spell by 100%, and any damage it absorbs heals you. More self-sustainability for PvP. Great maybe as a blood tank in a dungeon. If you know that there's a lot of casted spellcaster damage, you help the healer out. Again, Death Knight doesn't really struggle with healing, so I'm not sold on this one actually being that great for Death Knight. Grips of the Everlasting. For 3 seconds after casting Death Grip, you can cast it a second time without regard for its cooldown. Really good for pulling together mobs, depending on if our Prot Warriors are still kind of the king of the tanks for Mythic Plus. Bringing an Unholy Deathknight to reposition monsters could be a really solid option, especially with some of the Covenant abilities like the Necro Lords. So maybe this could be good utility in Mythic Plus. But generally, you don't really. I feel like utility sometimes falls off, it pales in comparison, I should say, to just raw damage output. In PvP, it's really nice, especially against spellcasters like mages. You pull them once, they blink, you pull them again. You pop the Necro Lord pull. Mages ain't going anywhere. So if you really want to piss off mages, this seems like a good one. I mean, it used to be a PvP set bonus. So will it see use in PvE? It's questionable. Maybe as blood, but it's kind of tough. I feel like utility is going to fall off a little bit in this regard. Pheromones. You and your minions gain 10% haste while you're inside your Death and Decay, and enemies inside damage by your Death and Decay have a chance to cower in place. So this is very similar to the old school Death and Decay from Wrath of the Lich King. This seems more like Earthquake, though. I think the Wrath of the Lich King Death and Decay was like permanently spammed fear on you when you're standing in it, which is really, yeah, that's not good. But this doesn't sound like that. This is like a chance to cower, so it's like Earthquake. If you're going to maybe go Night Fae and get the enhanced Death and Decay, this is a legendary that I see synergizing really well with it. It could be fun in battlegrounds, in dungeons for AoE trash pulls potentially, or maybe solo Torghast runs if you want to round up a ton of monsters. It will interrupt spellcasters when they have this chance to fear. Earthquake is also powerful in Mythic Plus for that reason, just a chance to stun targets if it's on a different diminishing return. Although fear, you don't really care too much. In PvP, it could backfire if it is on fear diminishing return and you're playing with fear classes like warlocks and priests, which appear to be doing very well at the moment, so you might be playing with them. That's PvP, right? PvE, it's just 10% haste built into your Death and Decay, and if you're running Night Fae, it would have good synergies. Super Strain, this is like the top performer at the moment on the beta. I don't know if it'll end up getting nerfed, and I saw it a lot in PvP with the skirmishes. You just basically, you're going to apply 3 diseases rather than just the one spec specific disease that you normally get, and it's just guaranteed dot damage. And this is something that works for all the specs, and if it's a top performer, then this could be a safe go-to. The downside of it in PvP is that classes that can remove diseases can just strip off all 3 of those as soon as you apply them. So if the other team is aware of this, or the enemy players are aware of this, they can outplay your legendary. But at the moment it's really strong. I do kind of feel like it'll get nerfed, but at the moment it is really strong. I think this is the one that you should keep your eye out on, though, if you're a Death Knight player who likes playing all the specs, or doing all of the content in the game. I think that it's kind of like the most even and powerful option. So the Unholy Deathknight specific legendaries, which are likely the top performers if you're someone who's like pushing your keystones really high, pushing your arena rating really high, or trying to mythic raid, these are probably going to be the legendaries that you target first, or at least one of them. Deadliest Coil reduces the runic power of Death Coil by 10, and Death Coil increases the duration. More synergy with your Gargoyle for Gargoyle builds seems really good. This is one that I would go for, I think. And now Death's Certainty. Yeah, I'm paid to talk. I'm not paid to talk correctly. Death Strike and Death Coil deal 10% increased damage and reduce the remaining cooldown of Defile or Death and Decay. Again, more synergy with the Night Fae, Death and Decay. If that ends up being the highest throughput and everyone's running Night Fae, this would be a really good synergy with it. Death Coil deals increased damage versus remaining cooldown, so just a little bit of extra single target damage, then reducing the cooldown of your AoE. And remember, AoE is starting to get capped. I didn't talk about that, but it is getting capped a bit for Death Knight as well. Your disease isn't going to spread to everything immediately. I believe it's only one target, so getting your AoE buffed here with the Death and Decay build from Night Fae could be really good. That's something that will require further testing and then after tuning as well, but I see that as potential. Frenzied Monstrosity, Dark Transformation, also increases the attack speed and damage of your Monstrosity by 20%. Seems good for single target burst. I don't know if you would necessarily bring Unholy Deathknight for single target burst. I feel like getting your Gargoyle really powerful and also buffing your Dark Transformation with this legendary outvalues this, where it's only your Monstrosity, to me. These seem very similar in what they're trying to get done. It's just more value from Deadliest Coil than it would be from this one. Reanimated Shambler. Your attacks have a chance to summon a superpower zombie that shambles super zombie. It's superpower. It's like superhero zombie. Whatever. Shambles forward and explodes, dealing damage and applying a festering wound to nearby targets. Really good for just switching targets frequently. I would say this has to be the strongest. I don't know if it is the strongest AoE contender. If you're running Night Fae, I feel like this would be the strongest AoE contender, but maybe if you're not running Night Fae, then Reanimated Shambler has potential by getting festering wounds up onto other targets. You don't need to switch over and stack them up. They'll just already have it, so you can more easily just spam Scourge Strike. Smoother gameplay for attacking multiple targets. Seems like a decent AoE one, but this would, I feel like, has to be tested more for me to give you a 100%. This is the AoE one that you go after at the moment, but it seems fun, right? Fun's fun. Yeah. All right. Conduits. Let's keep this going. Right? We're trying to get through this all, we don't got all day. Unholy Deathknight. So conduits are like sockets. You have aggro, you have defense, and you have utility. Potency conduits are aggro, so these are the ones that are going to be helping you do more damage. And for Unholy Deathknight, you've got the Convocation of the Dead. When a festering wound bursts, the cooldown of your apocalypse is reduced by 0.5 seconds, and this also scales up. These are like gems that you beef up, and they get stronger and stronger, and the stronger this one gets, likely reduces the cooldown further and further. I don't know if that's getting to crazy land, where your apocalypse eventually has no cooldown, like Ineffable Truth. Maybe it does. I mean, look at rank 5 to 35. Maybe that ends up being really strong later on. At the moment, half a second doesn't seem too great. It might desync your cooldowns a little bit too much, but at a certain rank, it might sync them up so they line up better. That's what you'd want to take into consideration with anything regarding cooldown reduction. Sudden Doom, so the free Death Coils, increases the damage of your next Death Coil. Has some decent synergies with that kind of the Gargoyle build, but it would only be for single target. Eternal Hunger, Dark Transformation's duration is increased by 5 seconds. Oh my god, are you going to have a super... What if that legendary that increases the damage of your pet, and then you got this conduit maxed out, and your pet's super powered, attacking really fast all the time? Now I think I see why that legendary is there. So if you were going to go for this conduit and rank it up, you could just have this super strong ghoul for most of an engagement. Throughput in PvE, right? You only care if it's the highest number. In PvP... Again, you still kind of only care about it if it's the highest number, but it's still kind of cool. You just get a big super powered buddy the whole time. Lingering Plague. Scourge Strike extends the duration of your Virulent Plague by 0.3 seconds. Could be good for just dot management. trying to maintain it on multiple targets, as it's going to be a little bit more difficult to do so with the changes to the spreading of Virulent Plague. These all seem pretty fun and interesting to me at the moment. Unfortunately, fun and interesting might not matter, and it's just going to be, well, this does the most damage, so you get that. But most of the socket places that you put these conduits in usually have at least 2 potency ones, so you could go for like a combo of between the 2 of them. So think about that when you're considering. I don't see any immediate synergies that stand out to me between them. I just made that as a point and then didn't have anything to back it up. I don't see any immediate synergies between them. These are Covenant Potency Conduits, so it's still damage, but they're focused on the Covenant spell itself, which maybe before we get to, we should go over the Covenant abilities. So the Kyrian one, Shackle the Unworthy. It's just you apply a dot, and it also will do less damage to you. This, to me, seems like the safest pick overall. It's going to also, I believe, spread to another target when you enhance it. So when we look at the Conduits, it has a 100% chance to spread to an enemy each time it deals damage. So it's got dot spread, solid damage overall for single target, because it doesn't have to take into consideration that it needs to be nerfed for AoE because it is only single target. It's a nice dot. It's arcane damage, so still magic, so it would be countered by magic defensives. But the extra damage reduction to yourself doesn't matter in PvE, but in PvP it would. So I believe you get 5% less damage reduction from everything that hits, and then you can run that conduit, and then it would spread to other targets. You're just taking 5% less from everyone. It seems really good in PvP. Some of the passives from Milakos, I don't remember. The little Alkin, so you'll have like a little talent tree for the Kyrian Covenant, and if you pick the Alkin Mechanicos talent tree, you'll get polymorph and stun reductions when you stand still, and Death Knights are often stuck standing still, so you could get a lot of benefit there. More self-sustainability with the vial and the ability to remove bleeds, which usually counters plate classes. So this to me is just good for Death Knight overall, whether you're PvEing, because it's guaranteed to be good for single target. It has AoE potential, and in PvP you get damage reduction benefits on top of it. So overall, I don't see why Kyrian Death Knight wouldn't be a good pick. I guess thematically, why on earth is an undead Death Knight being an angel would be the only conflicting factor. But it seems like they've done that for a lot of specs, where they thematically make the Covenant that would be like, why would a druid want to be a Necro Lord? That doesn't make any sense. Death and decay, but they gave them the best ones. They want you to just like be twisted in your head in terms of your selection or something. But performance wise, this seems like a strong one. Venthyr, so the Swarming Mist, just extra AoE. So, but it also you get some dodge. Not as powerful as damage reduction, right? But some dodge, take that into consideration. Just does shadow damage all around. And every time you deal damage, you gain 3 runic power. Pretty nice for ramping up the Gargoyle build, if you're going to run Venthyr. And one of the downsides of the Death Knight is mobility, so you do still get that secondary, the Door of Shadows, to teleport around the map. You would be getting snare reductions as well from the Soulbind conduits, which help you a lot because you're slowed a lot. So overall, it still could be a good pick or a wise idea to go for Venthyr. I wouldn't just write this one off as not being an option if you're interested in going down the path of becoming a vampire. It seems like it would be good overall, and just getting extra AoE and Gargoyle synergies, similar cooldown, probably performs better than the Kyrian in terms of AoE. But if you're got a lot of boss fights that are only single target, then it probably falls off a bit. In PvP, it breaks crowd control, but pretty much everything you do as a Death Knight PvP breaks crowd control, not a big deal. The only trade-off in PvP would be that it's dodge as opposed to damage reduction, and the Conduit will increase the damage of it and the dodge chance, but only for the first 4 seconds. But you could rank that up, so maybe you get this point to get this to a point where it's an evasion. You should consider the late game, right? Like at the start of the expansion, it's really low, and maybe Blood Mist doesn't stand out. Well, 5% dodge or 10% dodge. But when you scale this conduit up, 100% dodge, Death Knight with evasion. You could even evasion tank for your dungeon or your raid if you absolutely needed to at that point, if it scales that high. So consider the late game when you're making these selections. Moving down to the Necro Lords. To me, this is the most fun one, and it looked the coolest. And if I was going to play Death Knight, I would play it because of that. The Abomination Limb. You just sprout out another arm. And then for 12 seconds, and every second you deal damage and you will pull an enemy to you. So I was talking about like the anti-mage builds, like you want to piss mages off in PvP, maybe just like a random battlegrounder Death Knight. I feel like this is going to be the most fun for you. Fleshcraft, you get some crowd control, you get some extra health, but they have nerfed Fleshcraft. Everyone keeps commenting on it being super crazy because it's just crowd control immunity, but they did nerf it on the beta already. So it's only crowd control immunity while you're channeling it, which means you can't attack. And I'm pretty sure you can't move either. And if you get interrupted, which you're not immune to, then you don't get the benefit of being immune to crowd control. You do soak an interrupt for your team. That's really nice in PvP. And maybe if the other team doesn't want to use an interrupt on that, you'll get the crowd control immunity benefit when you fully finish the channel for 4 seconds. It's not permanent or until the shield breaks. It's only for 4 seconds. But in that 4 seconds, you pop off with some Raise Abomination, you pop your Apocalypse, and you go and do your full maximum damage. In PvP, you're going to get a lot of value. Unfortunately, in PvE, to me, I feel like Necro Lord is going to fall off very hard. You're probably gonna be laughed at if you're a Necro Lord Death Knight in PvE, which is kind of funny again thematically, because you would think like Death Knights are like immediately, oh my god, Necro Lords embrace me, but the way that it looks at the moment, with a longer cooldown, probably performs less in AoE than Venthyr, and its passive not really playing into enhancing the weaknesses of the Death Knight. It doesn't need more durability with the shield. Crowd control immunity would be nice, but now after it's been nerfed, it's probably too awkward to fully utilize compared to the other benefits from the other covenants. So Necro Lord would just be a pick thematically for looks, if you really want those Death Knight sets or the Necro Lord mount, or just random battlegrounds in PvP, then it's still a good pick. But you might, I don't know, you might struggle to get people to take you seriously in other content, which is really unfortunate, and that's not what you want to have happen with the Covenants. And I think it is unfortunate because this is actually like the coolest spell animation wise and effect wise, I think, that's coming for Death Knights and Shadowlands. So it would be a little bit of a disappointment for it to be such an underperformer that you're almost laughed at. Night Fae, on the other hand, get Death's Due, which replaces Death and Decay. Super powerful Death and Decay. Enemies deal reduced damage to you, so if you're going to be flexing as a tank, as Blood Death Knight, you'd still get synergies there. Up to a maximum of 15% of their power is transferred to you as strength, so just huge, mega. And then remember, the Legendaries reduce the cooldown of your Death and Decay. This is what I was talking about, the synergies. If you run the Potency Conduits, it does more damage. So I could see builds where you're Night Fae and you're dropping down these massive Death and Decays. In PvP, maybe you play with a Spear of Bastion Warrior, and the Warrior pins them all down with the Spear, and you drop this massive Night Fae Death and Decay on them. Maybe even you're running the Legendary that could fear them while they're stuck in the Spear, getting pulled in infinitely. I think there's going to be a lot of wombo combos that we're going to have to experiment with PvP. It seems pretty fun overall, and it could just be the best AoE option for you. You also get the benefit of the soul shape, so you turn into a ghost fox and you can blink and you run really fast. That helps your mobility out a ton. You also get shadow meld if it's necessary for skips in Mythic Plus dungeons. You also get cheat death instead if you want to, running Night Fae. So again, like performance wise, I don't see how Night Fae wouldn't end up being a good option. But then thematically and visually, you're like, why are the Death Knights playing with foxes and squirrels and pixies? You're just like, what's going on? This is what I meant by like, why is the best performance option thematically the worst option? They just want you to be like, I'm a fairy skeleton, I guess. I don't know. But this could be a top performer, and if you're tired of running around really slowly, then you can become a fox and run around really quickly. So I would feel like it's a strong contender. Overall, I think they're all strong contenders. It's just Necro Lord I'm worried will fall behind in PvE, but it's still a strong contender in PvP. And that's it for the Conduits and the enhancement effects. I didn't speak about Necro Lord, but so the Abomination Limb will deal more damage. Perhaps this Conduit will help you out in PvE and make it more of a viable option in PvE, but I don't know, man. Super powerful Death and Decay, amazing single target dot, massive AoE damage. This one, I'm worried about it. Endurance Conduits. So we're talking about defense here now. We got the Hardened Bones. While Lichborn is active, your damage you take is reduced by 5%, and that'll scale higher. So it's not only just fear immunities and a little bit of leech. Now it's a big boy defensive cooldown. This is making me think that they should probably delete the honor talent Lichborn. It already conflicts with it being the same name. I mean, even look at a Wowhead, like it's still got the tooltip for the old Lichborn. It probably even synergizes with the honor talent Lichborn. I would imagine that's probably getting removed or maybe changed to be something different, but that's amazing. Just get extra damage reduction cooldown, PvE and PvP. Insatiable Appetite, Death Strike's minimum healing is increased by 1%. 1%, not a lot, but it scales up, remember. Death Knights, again, maybe not in need of much healing. It would be more beneficial to get damage reduction. And generally for Endurance Conduits, from what I've seen, you only get one. So going after the Lichborn one, I think, would make the most sense. Maybe if you're in a raid, this one, though, Reinforced Shell, Anti-Magic Zone's radius is increased by 10%. The duration is increased by 1 second. So if you're like a hardcore raider and you don't care about anything else, I could see this being really good to help your raid. Definitely securing you a spot in a raid. With a super long-lasting 20% magic damage reduction. Seems pretty good. And finally, the finesse conduits. We've got the utility, the most fun part of the specialization. Chilled Resilience. Finesse conduit, which is Icebound's Fortitude's cooldown is reduced by 15 seconds. And it ranks up, so that could be massive again, just for your own personal defensive management. That would be, if you're a PvP focused player, you definitely want that. Mythic Plus player, you probably definitely want that. But if there's something that would benefit your raid more, then you might not want it, but still, that's great. Fleeting Wind, Death's Advance, grants you an additional 10% movement speed. So if you want to be moving around a little bit faster, that would scale up as well with the ranks. So you get a really fast sprint. You might be a sprint evasion Death Knight by the end of the expansion based on what I've been talking about. Spirit Drain, successfully interrupting an enemy with Mind Freeze, grants 10 runic power. That would also scale up and have amazing synergies with the Gargoyle. Maybe if it gets to a point where you could get 100 runic power if you land an interrupt, you get that Gargoyle out, bang out a Mind Freeze, and then just spam out Death Coils. I could see that being really strong in PvE and PvP when you rank it up higher. And that's where I'm considering the late game of Death Knight much later on in the expansion. Unending Grip. Death Grip slows an enemy by 25% or until canceled. Man, you already have Chains of Ice. I feel like having another slow on this is just like... I would almost prefer that it roots the target. Like you grip the target and it's rooted. Maybe if it's even for only 0.2 seconds and then you rank it up and eventually it becomes like a 3-second root. Now, if you're somebody that's not the Death Knight and that happens, you get gripped into a root and then running the Legendary, you get gripped into another root and then you got this Abomination Limb. Maybe that's not fun. Maybe you're not having too much fun in PvP, but a lot of this stuff seems like just trying to go crazy and out of control. So, but at 20, there's no way you would ever take this with it being a movement speed impairing effect for anything in the game, PvP or PvE, especially with the potency of these other options and likelihood of only getting one finesse socket. I feel like there's no way you would ever take this for anything. Which is a little bit of a lackluster way to end the video here for Unholy Deathknight. But in terms of ranking it on a tier list, in terms of its fun and its engagement, it's getting brought back its Legion playstyle. It's getting a lot of its old school utility. I still would have liked to have seen presences brought back to it, more specifically for PvP. It's getting a lot of stuff that it probably already didn't need. It was already benefiting from. It's a strong contender already in dungeons. It's pretty much a guaranteed lock-in for raids with Anti-Magic Zone coming back baseline. So in terms of potentially being a top performer, in terms of being fun, dot management, resource management, massive cooldown structure in terms of how you want to place your cooldowns, it seems like a really good solo player spec. It seems like a really good dungeon spec, PvP spec, and raid spec. So it would be really hard for me to rank Unholy Deathknight on a lower tier when I make that melee specialization tier list. At the moment, it's a strong top contender. Maybe it becomes my new main. I don't play Death Knight very much. Maybe that would be a nice break or a change. But other than that, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope this opened up some information for you to try and make your decision for whether or not the Unholy Deathknight is for you, what Covenant, what Conduits you're looking at, what synergies you're looking at. Please subscribe to the channel if you are not already. It does help me out immensely. And if you liked the video, leave it a like. Leave a comment down below if you think that I missed something or I said something totally idiotic, because I sometimes do that. I do. And I'll admit it. And I do admit it when you point it out in the comments. I don't hide it. I don't delete your comment like, oh, you called me out. I'm deleting that. No. I want accurate information. So thank you for that. I appreciate being called an idiot. I will see you in the next video. Goodbye for now.